How's it going? I know that a lot of people maybe don't necessarily know how to take me because I'm somebody that likes to joke around and tell jokes on one half of my thinking on things. Especially, I like to joke about things that are serious and things that are important to me. But then there's part of me that is not kidding around. And I don't know. It's just one of these things where I guess that's maybe what makes me different than other comedians. Is that I don't think my life is a joke. I don't think reality is a joke. I don't think the universe is a joke that's funny once you realize it's on you. I think there's a time to be serious and solemn. And so this is serious and solemn. Sometimes I'm not serious and solemn, and I feel like you should be able to do both. And my hope is that maybe the people in the general public start to grasp that people who are actors and entertainers, that's not all that we do. We are also capable of having serious, legitimate political thoughts and all those things. So I'm gonna read this little statement here that I have prepared, and the thing is it's really hard to get charges brought before standing members of the government, because those charges have to come referred from an agency like the RCMP or CSIS or the Ottawa Police Service or whatever. Federal charges have to be referred to by one of those types of agencies. And so since I'm not connected to any of those agencies, instead I deal with these things in the public and in the public eye. And of course, understanding that CSIS and CSEC and probably various agencies, in Canada's intelligence, they keep an eye on what I'm doing, because I've deliberately lived my life in such a way as to be on their radar, as to be able to communicate with them. So, to whom it may concern, you have received this letter because I am hoping to work with those of you who are currently in key positions of power in order to secure and serve the national interest. As you may discover about me, I always open with a diplomatic and cooperative approach. However, what is laid out in this document will happen, with your support and assistance, or in spite of your opposition and resistance. Those who make change by peaceful means impossible make change by violent means inevitable. I am committed to protecting the peace that we enjoy in Canada. However, circumstances that are beyond my control are currently making protecting that peace an increasingly arduous and difficult task. On some level, you, the people in power, have dropped the ball somewhere along the lines. Shit happens. I get it. Life is complicated. People get tricked or deceived or are unaware of what's taking place. I hold no one who is honestly doing their best to serve the nation personally responsible for our current dwindling state. But the ball has been dropped, and together we must pick it up and get ourselves back on track. There are widespread and diverse problems we are encountering that affect the livelihood and national security of our nation and our American partners. As Canada, we are failing our closest ally and partner, the United States of America, and this must be corrected post-haste. We are a growing national security risk to our American cousins, and unless we begin to tackle these problems on our own in a meaningful way, they will be forced to protect their own interests and people by dominating and conquering our country. If we are unable to hold our elected officials to account for their treasonous actions, we have no business considering ourselves a nation and should welcome the liberating American troops. So, this is the prosecute test. I'm going through some things that are in the Crown Council's website about the steps that they have to go through to determine whether or not a prosecution is valid. And so I'm going to just do their homework for them so they have no excuse to not do their job. So the prosecute test. Is there a reasonable prospect of conviction based on the evidence that is likely to be available at trial? The answer to that question is yes. The evidence required to prove the case are a matter of public record. Okay, next question. Would prosecution best serve the public interest? Certainly. The public interest, third criteria. The public interest in the due enforcement of criminal law will in most cases, without more, require that the matter be brought before the courts for a decision on the merits. Yeah, that's totally applicable here. The nature of the harm includes loss or injury caused by the alleged offense, relevant consequences to the victim, the community, the environment, natural welfare, or societal, economic, cultural, or other public interests. Yeah. A government staffed with individuals who participate in treason via the parliamentary process is a serious harm to the public interest and has jeopardized confederation. You know, lots of Western Canada wants to break off. I support the West one. You gotta love them. It's the only thing that will wake up the people in Eastern Canada to the level of corruption that they've abided for too long as the general population. Continuing in the criteria of determining whether or not we should prosecute. The extent to which the alleged offense causes concern in the community. Yeah. There is well-founded mistrust of the government acting in accordance with both the rule of law and in serving and protecting the interests of the Canadian people. Okay. Another criteria for prosecution. The availability of civil remedies is not a factor that, now on the website it says militates, but I'm pretty sure they mean mitigates, against prosecution. These individuals in government need to be made an example of for future generations and leaders of this country in order to demonstrate Canada's continued commitment to upholding the rule of law. Level of culpability. Bam! The accused's degree of responsibility. As government officials in the governing party and parties of official status, the accused bear full responsibility for their actions in government and should be held accountable for their actions. Criteria 2. Level of involvement and whether they were in a position of authority or trust. The accused were or are in a position of public trust. To sit in the House of Commons and make decisions as part of their role in the apparatus of government, and to then provide assistance and comfort to enemy combatants in order to preserve the rule of law, these elected officials must be held to account for their criminal acts. Where a prosecution would maintain public confidence in the government, courts, a regulatory regime, and the administration of justice, or have the opposite effect. So in my view, not prosecuting undermines public confidence in the courts. Prosecuting these offenses will reaffirm the public's trust in the court system and the established rule of law in Canada. Holding our elected officials to account for their actions in relation to the discharge of their duties in government is a necessary step in reaffirming the eroding and elusive concept of the rule of law. Now, one of my favorite parts, the irrelevant criteria. Crown Counsel's personal feelings about the accused. Regardless of how Crown Counsel may feel about the elected officials and whether holding them criminally responsible for their votes in the House of Commons, the simple fact remains that by voting nay to this opposition motion number 413, an assistance was provided to ISIS or Daesh. Possible political advantage or disadvantage to the government or any political group or party. That's not a relevant criteria for the Office of Public Prosecutions to consider. Proceeding with this prosecution would mean a serious disadvantage to the government and would likely result in the end of both the Liberal Party of Canada and the New Democratic Party of Canada. As a long-time New Democrat supporter myself, this is an outcome that I have my own mixed feelings about. However, the simple fact remains that voting nay on this motion did provide an assistance to enemy combatants, and it has seriously jeopardized national security in Canada. By downplaying the dangers of Islamic extremism in the name of cultural diversity and tolerance, it undermines the sickening reality of the horrendous acts committed by ISIS, acts which are often committed against Muslim people. By not firmly standing up to ISIS, the government of Canada has lost credibility with many Muslim people who begin to wonder who will protect them from ISIS if their government is welcoming the fighters and perpetrators of these horrendous acts back into the country. The possible effect of the decision on the personal or professional circumstances of those responsible for the prosecution decision. So this is what I'm going to say to the people that work in the Office of Public Prosecutions, okay? Prosecuting this case might get you fired. Do it anyway, for the good of our country. The need to maintain public confidence in the administration of justice may also necessitate, in some circumstances, public communication for the reasons for not prosecuting. If the Office of Public Prosecutions refuses to prosecute this case, they have no business remaining in power, and the legal tradition of Canada would belong in the dustbin of history. So, here's the overview. What is all this about? You've got to be wondering. Thomas, how are you trying to say that there are 209 members in the government that are guilty of treason? Well, here it is. On November 2nd, 2014, as part of Operation Impact, CF 188 Hornets conducted Canada's first combat airstrike on Daesh or ISIS targets. On December 4th, 2017, the official opposition made a motion in the House on ISIS or Daesh fighters returning to Canada. Vote number 413. The motion was that the House A. condemn the horrific acts committed by ISIS, B. acknowledge that individuals who joined ISIS fighters are complicit in these horrific acts and pose a danger to Canadians. C. Call on the government to bring to justice and prosecute ISIS fighters returning to Canada. And D. Insist that the government makes security and protection of Canadians its priority rather than the reintegration of ISIS fighters or unnecessary financial payouts to convicted terrorists like Omar Khadr. So, 288 votes were cast on the motion. 79 were in favor of the motion. 209 were opposed to the motion. 46(1)(c) of the Criminal Code of Canada clearly states, everyone commits high treason who, in Canada, assists an enemy at war with Canada, or any armed force against whom Canadian forces are engaged in hostilities, whether or not a state of war exists between Canada and the country whose forces they are engaged with. All 209 members of Parliament who voted down opposition motion 413 on December 4th, 2017, provided, through their vote in Parliament, an assistance to an enemy force that the Canadian forces were engaged in hostilities against. I hereby submit to you a summary of why the standing government is guilty of the indictable offense of high treason and should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So that's what's up. That's what's up. And the question you got to ask yourself is, these people that we're paying to oversee our justice system and the rule of law, maybe they're a little oblivious to this. But now that I've spelled it out perfectly clear how those 209 members of Parliament are guilty of treason, this is a very cut and dry case. And so the simple fact is that no one has the cojones to challenge the government on treason calls into question the validity of the justice system we have. Because if we're going to allow our elected officials to commit treasonous acts and then not prosecute them, what business do we have considering ourselves to be a country that operates by the principles of the rule of law? Right? Because the rule of law means the people that are in charge are just as accountable to the law as you or I. And the simple fact is, what they did by voting that down was treason. So that's the case against the 209 members of the government of Canada and the House of Commons, and why they're guilty of treason. The big question you got to ask yourself is, why aren't the police doing their job? Right? Why does it take some supposed schizophrenic to point out that the government has committed treason? Just a little food for thought. Have a great day.